Good afternoon. My name is Dustin Dupas, Chief Operating Officer at Tabs Analytics. Welcome to our October webinar. This is our first annual household care study. We'll be reviewing channel and consumer trends in key household care categories, including laundry detergent, consumer tissue and household cleaning products, and air fresheners. Our next webinar will be the fourth annual cosmetics study, where we'll continue to track key consumer and channel findings for color cosmetics. Be sure to join us back for this presentation on Wednesday, November 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can check our website at tabsanalytics.com next week for that sign-up information. Presenting today is Dr. Kurt Jetta, CEO and founder of Tabs Analytics. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions that you could submit via the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin. We're recording, correct?
Correct.
Okay, got it. Yeah, and thanks everyone for attending. This will be the first time we'll talk about household products. Hadn't done a whole lot of work in the sector, so it was a lot of great insights, and just it's hopefully by the end it'll frame a way that you would think about this sector relative to other sectors in the store. Because we're always trying to, we tend to have a very retailer-focused orientation, category management. That's the heritage of the company. And how can we use this information to enhance our standing against all of the other products that are being sold in the store? And I think there's a lot of good material here that can be utilized. So let me just go through some of the methodology. This will be one of several sector studies that we've done. We've done beauty, vitamins, baby, personal care, and a few others that aren't coming to mind. But we're starting to get a great database of knowledge and benchmarking, and we do the same study every time with 1,000 adults over 18. This was done in September of 2017. And we ask similar types of questions on what categories are they buying and how often do they buy it. And here we're asking about laundry and paper products, cleaning products, dish detergents. What type of deals do they utilize? So FSIs or everyday low price or rewards programs. Agreement on two on-trend topics, organics and online purchasing, as well as research. And then finally, where are they buying products for household? And we don't break out grocery banners specifically. So what happens because of our methodology and trying to calculate share, that tends to understate that channel, but not dramatically, but they always understand that if we say grocery is 15 share, based on the way we track it in our survey, it's probably more like 18, 19, 20, something like that. And we also do a lot of internal validity checks, so we don't want somebody that says they never buy these categories also saying they buy them regularly at Costco. So we do a lot of that, and then we make sure that we're corroborating with other industry sources that we know to be true, particularly on when we talk trends. Now, we can't talk trends here just because this will be the first time we've done it, so we're talking more magnitude and size of categories. The interesting stuff starts when we start tracking this over time. So today we will review category trends and category sizes, purchase dynamics, demographics, who's buying and who are the heaviest buyers, what kind of deals and promotions do consumers prefer, where are they buying the products, and I talked about the way we calculate share. It's called share of mentions. And so we'll take all the mentions across all the outlets, add those all up, and then the mentions for a specific outlet are divided by that number. And we find that that highly correlates to actual share of transactions that you would get in a household panel data. What are their attitudes toward on-trend concepts? And then a couple definitions on how we determine heavy buyers. It's based on a point system on their frequency of claim, frequency of purchase by category. So 31% of the buyers we consider heavy. They do 60% or more of the reported transactions. And then a heavy deal buyer, out of 11 deals, they have to claim they buy 6 or more, and they're roughly 25% of the buyers. If you want to go to similar studies for other sectors, you can get into webinars.tabsanalytics.com. And then also what that will do is talk to you about the methodology we employ, particularly on that share of mentions, and we have some correlation analysis to just show that it is in fact a reliable measure of share of outlet purchases. So first of all, let's just look at the categories. Here's the 15 categories. You can see they're all fairly high penetration, some extremely high, like the top 3, toilet paper, laundry detergent, paper towel. These categories, even on down to say, paper napkins, mops, and brooms, I mean, they are classic traffic drivers. These are the categories that retailers want to focus on, need to focus on. And the reason being is not only do they have high penetration, but these average purchases per buyer, which you can see in the red, are all pretty high, particularly relative to other non-food products and even relative to most food products. Now the blue is if we weight in the non-buyers as well, so that's per capita. And so I have high penetration, I have high repeat rates, and then I also have these categories that are pretty high transaction size. The laundry detergent is often over $10, as is a big bulk pack of toilet paper and other things. And so 12 of the 15 categories here have an average of purchases per buyer, claimed purchases per buyer of over 4. When we did personal care, that number was only 3 of 16, and those were categories like shaving, hair care, personal wash, deodorant, and many others. So you can see that this is the type of category and the type of sector that is just, that's the magnet that retailers want to use to bring those customers in, because a lot of them, they shop it a lot of times and they spend a lot, high market basket each time they purchase. So really the top 3. If I was to run this category prioritization model against anything in the category and I weighted those 3 as most important, you'd see household products. And then when we talk to demographics, that's a nice even bonus. And so the heaviest buyers are the large households, 5+ members, the households with kids, and that's pretty much the case for almost any CPG category. But it's particularly pronounced in household cleaning. I mean, a lot of 5 or more people can make a mess. You need a lot of stuff to maintain that household. But these are categories that also skew very heavily toward blacks and Hispanics. And the gender gap isn't that great. So men are almost as likely as women to be heavy buyers. So this is of the particular demographic group going across the x-axis. So you see it by age, by region, by income, by household size, kids' presence, and ethnicity. What percent of that group are heavy buyers? And so you see the national average is 31%, and you can see these numbers that spike way up by household size, 5+, and then the presence of kids. So having more members, so that could be, kind of the boomerang kids that are still living in the house, so they're 25, 30 years old still in the household. Because kids' presence is defined as under 18 years old. Also look at the very high percentage of Hispanics and blacks, so 41 and 44 versus white households, 29. So that's 50% more likely of a black or Hispanic household being a heavy buyer than a white family. And so for targeting opportunities, I mean, you also have this nice benefit of household products. So you get this really kind of nice confluence of strategic factors that just make this, perfect sector for retailers to key on, regardless of channel. And we're going to see how these channel preferences break out. And so this is also one that the consumers like deals. So they look for, on average, they're regularly using 3.8. That's not sometimes, it's not occasionally, it's regularly. So that's the standard. And they're oriented more toward passive versus active, and I'll explain that in a bit. But the key thing to note is everybody, just like in all these surveys we do and studies, everybody wants deals. I mean, 9 out of 10 consumers use at least one tactic of the 11 regularly. almost 2/3 of them use 3 or more. So just there's this arsenal of ways to save money and to get value, and they're constantly going to their quiver to find the best one. And that's my my beef with Walmart or any EDLP operator. It's like they do great on that tactic, and that certainly, as we'll see, is the most important one, but it's not the only one. There's just a whole host of ways that consumers like to get deals, high-low, as well as EDLP. But you can see these are all passive, meaning the consumer just has to go to the store and they'll find it, versus doing something actively like pulling the store circular or cutting out a coupon or shopping around for best deals. And so these all are much higher than what we would see in other sectors for the large size and bonus pack. And then just benchmarking to personal care, that number was 3.4 tactics. So you can see this is much more deal oriented, but the difference is because the bonus packs and larger sizes. So that has implications on how you're going to go and promote. So these are more load up type strategies versus incremental transaction strategies, which is what these other, the circulars and rewards tend to do. This was really low, shop for best deal. So it typically means that there's not a lot of bouncing around. And the low number here at 29, normally we see it in the high 30s or low 40s in various sectors, probably is a function of the fact that they're getting loaded up, and we can see it here from some of these. Now, that's not to say load up isn't a bad thing. I mean, if it's generating incremental sales, that's a good thing. Certainly retailers appear to be able to hold their consumers a bit better, and we'll see that in the outlet data here. So at the top, we're just looking at what percent of adults are buying at least 3 times. So it's a regular purchase. And so say grocery at 56%, even though it's number 2, that's lower than we would see for, say, regular food products, which would be in the high 70s, low 80s. Walmart's number 1, but you can see dollar at 36. They're normally in the high teens, low 20s. Target is usually more like 80% of Walmart, 70%. And this is actually much lower than that, so they're underdeveloped. But you can see there's a lot of outlets where consumers are going for household products. But what's notable here is there's a lot of them that have meaningful share. So dollar is almost 10. If I add up Sam's, Costco, and BJ's, that's actually over 10%. E-com is 5%. And you see a lot of data out there. I know there's 1010 releases studies on what are the biggest items on e-com, and most of the time they're household products and Tide, etc. But they're only 5% of the transactions. So there's a lot of areas, and home improvement, look at that, that's 9% of the transactions. So there's a lot of meaningfully sized channels of household products. And so it somewhat suggests, implies that retailers aren't totally irrational. They get it. They understand that these categories are very strategically important. And they are giving probably a disproportionate of support to these categories, and that doesn't appear to be a bad thing, because they're all getting a good chunk of a very, very big sector. As I mentioned earlier, we've done these studies, similar studies in other sectors, and this just gives you a kind of a relative benchmark on where household places. So you can see the 2 of them, baby products and vitamins, very high, well into the teens, but the others that are much higher frequency are more likely to be bought in brick and mortar. So if you recall, well, maybe you don't recall, but go back to baby 2016, where I presented a hypothesis, a hypothetical framework for this understanding potential of e-commerce, and it was a function of high transaction size and low frequency. So the less frequently and the higher transaction size, the more likely it is you're going to have high share. So certainly these top 3 are very high transaction size, but household products are bought much more frequently than vitamins and baby products, thus the lower share. Snacks and beverages, you're talking transaction sizes of usually lower than $4, bought every other week, if not more frequently, so lower share. personal care, not bought as frequently, but again, lower transaction size. So that framework appears to be holding up when we look at this. Not exactly, but certainly directionally, that seems to explain a lot of what we're seeing when we look at development for brick and mortar versus e-commerce. As we look at trends by age, what we can see is some pretty strong differences, but this is consistent with other categories and other sectors. It's just not quite as pronounced as we see here at grocery. They're not doing a good job at getting younger consumers relative to the older shoppers, and remember that oldest shopper is not as heavy a buyer. So that, if you recall in the early slide, only 18% of them were heavy buyer. Target skews younger, no surprise. E-commerce skews younger, no surprise. Natural grocery skews younger, so just a good frame of reference for getting, for demographically desirable targets. You really see a big difference in ethnicity, these ethnic profiles for the various outlets. So if I looked at, say, dollar stores, that spikes with African Americans, Home Depot spikes with Hispanics, Costco, which is very West Coast oriented, lots of Asians as well as Hispanics, and you can see the share there. About twice as what all the other groups, and then value grocery spiking among African Americans. So you have these interesting profiles, shopper profiles for household products that, again, much more pronounced than what we see for other sectors. So it certainly seems like some of these outlets are, maybe explicitly trying to exploit these differences and capture these desirable targets. As we look at it by buyer group, light versus medium versus heavy, and left to right, the lighter, the medium, heavy, you can see a big old drop with grocery. You see a drop with Walmart. And then what you tend to see is that nobody is kind of capturing a huge share among these other guys, but they all seem to be capturing almost fair share of that increase that you see the drop off in grocery. But they're traditional grocery not getting the heavy buyers at all. And what would be explaining that is very high correlation to the fact that they're also not getting the heavy deal buyers. And so I've shown in many other webinars the strong relationship. It's cause and effect. The more deals, the more sales, the higher share. And so given that dynamic, the quest is to find a profitable path to do that. When in actuality, manufacturers seem to be pulling away from it. This is a way, if they can find a way to do it profitably, that they should be doing more of it. And so Walmart, big old drop among heavy deal buyers. So remember, these is about 25% of the buyers, roughly 40 to 50%, depending on the sector we're looking at, of the transactions. So very important. That's kind of the path if they ever wanted to seriously get their sales up, focusing on these guys. And you see it with grocery as well. And who gains? Well, some of these value channels, value grocery and dollar stores, big time gains, but also other mass merchants, so they get it. That's Meijer, that's Fred Meyer, certainly finding a way to grow their share there. That's even Kmart. The oft overlooked, never mentioned, never will be mentioned again in any of these webinars, Kmart. Yes, you heard it, Kmart. Now, let's just shut the door on them. They may not even be around next time we do this thing. So that's about all I'm going to say on them. They had a good run, 40, 50 years, but it's time to shut it down. So we're looking at a category now that's about, I keep saying category, it's really a sector, 75 billion based on the way we project. So we're looking at the known universe, estimating what percent they are of transactions, which we can get through the survey, how their average transaction size varies versus the non-track channel, and that's how we come up with that number. And we're looking at e-commerce is roughly 3 to 4 billion of that. And the key thing is, so even though it's big numbers, and that's why I'll want to track this a few more times, it could actually be a bit higher. We need to refine this a little bit more on the methodology, mainly because the uncertainty on transaction size, which is so vitally important in this category in particular. But still 6 in 10 sector buyers don't buy anything in this sector online. So there's still 40% of the people that are buying, but 60% of the people that just haven't done it even once, which is a really, really high number. I mean, brick and mortar penetration, 98% of regular buyers, and this is 40% of just buying it even once. And you can see that Walmart.com now is really coming up on the heels of Amazon. Amazon really gained in grocery, we saw from our studies, but in all the non-food sectors where Walmart had this inherent comparative advantage anyway, they've really been able to leverage it, and now we're going to be a strong number 2. I'm not going to say it now, but I need to see a few more, and I need to see outside of the CPG universe. But I'm not doubting in 5 years. If somebody gave me, say, 3-to-1 odds that in 5 years Walmart would be bigger than Amazon in consumer products, durables, or kind of not services or any of that type of thing, I think I would take that bet. I mean, they are really, I mean, they jumped way up in vitamins, in baby, in some of these other sectors. So they're really coming on strong, you know, really concurrent with the whole jet acquisition and the management there. But Target is also, and we see that in their annual reports, Target's doing some real gains. I mean, they're making some moves in e-commerce, and it's really been through delivery because they're just now getting back to the pickup. So, and that still is, and I forgot to point out in a couple earlier slides, delivery is still much more preferred than pickup, and you know, will be for the foreseeable future. Now we look at some of these on-trend topics like organic, and you see a lot of organic brands. There's a lot of space dedicated to organic household products, and arguably this is an area where it could have the most, you know, impact on a sustainability perspective, because we're talking sometimes chemicals like bleach and household cleaners and paper filling landfills and all that stuff. Still though, very much of a niche. Only 9% of the consumers consider themselves regular buyers of organic household products. So this thing has a long, long, long way to go before it becomes mainstream. If you looked at the data, the sales of these on an individual item basis, with a few exceptions, is usually well below mainstream products. So there's clearly a niche, which is kind of the upscale, younger aspect, but also these, it's still very small. And then those that buy online regularly is also very small. And that's the biggest barrier to online e-commerce, grocery and e-commerce in our industry, is just the fact that most people aren't heavy shoppers, at least based on the way they consider themselves. And so again, a few niches where there's a little bit higher, but overall it's still, that is the biggest barrier to e-commerce growth in our industry, is e-commerce growth overall. It's just the mainstream just hasn't gotten there on a regular basis. So what can we conclude here? Well, it's a $75 billion industry, very big, very impactful, and it's also very strategically important. High penetration, high repeat, high transaction size. You've hit all three on that. I mean, that is, you know, the trifecta as far as strategic goals that most retailers want to achieve. And consistent with other studies, it's a big category, but deals still very important. And maybe because deals are important, this category is what it is. I remember looking at, we did toilet paper over in the Netherlands, and they have constrained times when they can actually deal. So they're not allowed to deal at any given time, but they deal in like certain periods of times. They were generating well over 100 weeks of supply, 100 times lift. So you say, well, then it's obvious consumers are just waiting for those regulated time periods to do it. One of the manufacturers decided not to play ball, did not promote, and they didn't get anything. Their sales did not go up. They didn't necessarily go down, but they just, you know, their baseline didn't go up. So it just goes to show you that, you know, this stuff, consumers are willing to load, they're willing to use more if you give them the right financial incentive. deals are skewed toward those passive versus active tactics. So the load up versus the incremental transaction seem to be, relatively speaking to other sectors, more important here than they do in all the other sectors we track. Walmart's number one, they're 16%. That's toward the low end of the sectors that we track on share. Usually they're closer to 20. But as I've noted, there's a lot of other retail outlets that are very significant. Food is even lower at 14.9, and their food and beverage share, for contrast, is over 22. But this is a retail landscape that has a lot of significant players. Food, mass, e-commerce, home improvement like Lowe's and Home Depot, Dollar, and then Club all have a very significant presence. Value grocery, as we saw, also has a meaningful presence here. It's probably the one non-food category that they actually are pretty of meaningful presence. So there's all these outlets that kind of get the strategic importance of it. So they should be more than willing to engage in not only just the big brands, the big manufacturers, but the small ones as well. They need full coverage on this to maximize the potential. The target buyer here is large households, the 5+, particularly among minority households, and their heavy buying is 50% more than white. So this is when we talk about diversity in the population and targeting towards special ethnicities, again, this is a poster child sector to start doing that. 56% of the households, in fact, more than half of these high 5+ members are heavy buyers, and then the minority households are 40 to 45%. Organic and online shopping in general, very niche, still a long way to go before it becomes mainstream. And our data, as we've been tracking these topics for the last 3-4 years, it still has a long way to go, probably 10 more years before organics gets into the mainstream. And I'm not even certain that it ever will. By definition, you can't get this stuff to be parity priced just because the production costs are so much higher. And so that's always going to be a barrier. And then there's potential efficacy issues or any number of other issues that consumers in our research have played back. Household products really are a bellwether sector for what we see in our industry overall. So to the extent there's those of you who are asked to comment on the state of the industry or where's the industry heading, and it's somewhat impossible unless you do it for a living to know everything about it. You can get a lot, you can make a lot of inferences just by understanding this sector in particular. So what do we mean by that? What am I talking about? Well, first of all, where is alternative channel versus mass market going to shake out? So not just e-commerce, but where's value grocery going to end up? What about specialty channel and CPG? How about club? All of those guys are a significant factor. Dollar stores, big channel, one of the biggest we've seen. The diversity aspect of this, really, how can we optimize and maximize our focus and sales against these minority populations that are soon to become a majority in our country over time. And then also, what is the long-term viability of organics as a meaningful presence? Will it become a presence? I mean, this sector, more than most others, it's a real big issue. Other than, say, perishables and fruits and vegetables, organics has kind of the, relatively speaking, the biggest amount of presence and environmental impact in this sector versus any of the others. So that's my view of what we see in our survey on household products. I'm going to kick it over to Dustin. I'll answer questions. And again, thanks everyone for listening in. So Dustin, take it away.